literary connoisseur. I'm really just a nerd addicted to escapism. Hey Olivia, it's Wednesday. I just got my haircut this morning and I haven't quite figured out how to style it, so if it looks weird, that's why. First of all, I loved your video last week. It was so fun and nostalgic. I remember playing Lego Kids when I was a kid, but I was really more of a Pop Tropica and Club Penguin person. And I had a really weird Animal Jam phase in middle school. So that was mostly what I played. I didn't play a ton of Webkins, but I'm pretty sure I had like a little golden retriever puppy. I do not remember their name, and I don't remember my login, which is very unfortunate. So it is almost the end of 2023, which is insane. I do not know what happened to this year. But one of my big goals for the year was to read 20 plus books, and I managed to actually do that. I really enjoyed reading a lot this year, and so I thought it'd be fun to share the books I read. So here are all of the books that I read in 2023, organized by genre. And also I have my top 5 at the end, so that's how we're organizing things today. First up, we have the romance category. This was kind of the year of really getting into romance for me. I had never been a big romance reader growing up, and I found I really enjoy it. I really like the escapism, how usually it's more lighthearted and fun. First up is See You Yesterday by Rachel Lynn Solomon. The premise of this book is that a girl named Barrett is forced to relive her terrible first day of college when she realizes that her nemesis is trapped in the time loop with her. I went through a really weird phase this summer of just ingesting a lot of time loop media. I have no idea why or what sparked it, but this book was really fun and it was cool to have that be a part of it. I love the little enemies to lovers. I love the little college setting, so that was really fun. It wasn't like groundbreaking, it wasn't exceptionally written or anything like that. It was just fun and I enjoyed it. I also really liked the mother-daughter relationship in this. I think something that's really important for me in romances is that it's focused on the interpersonal relationships that don't just revolve around the romance, and I felt like this book did that pretty well, which was nice. Next up, I read all 4 currently released Emily Henry books this year. My friend recommended that I check out Emily Henry because she was a big fan of her books, and I immediately got hooked and read all of them in the span of like a summer. I love how Emily Henry writes romances. I love that they're not just focused on the dynamic between the main pairing, but it's really about the character's internal growth. I think that's really cool. Beach Read was the first one that I read, and I really loved it. I really liked the plot all the way up until the last chapter. I did not like that they immediately got engaged. That was weird to me. Next up is Book Lovers. Honestly, this is probably the strongest, in my opinion, out of the 4 books that are currently released. I love the dynamic of the couple in this one. I love the setting. And I also thought that the dynamic with the main character's sister was just really strong. Next up, I read Happy Place. 2 people, including you, Olivia, recommended me read this and said it would be a personal attack, and it in fact was. The premise was super strong, and I just love the friendship dynamics in this. I love a found family. I felt like this did it really well, and the main character's internal conflict was definitely relatable. And finally, People We Meet on Vacation. I read this one last out of all 4 of the books. I also really loved the premise of this one. I think it's so fun to have these different travel stories interspersed throughout. I didn't really buy the ultimatum that the couple kind of faced, like the whole you need to move to New York to make this work. But for the most part, I thought it was good. So yeah, I will forever read everything that Emily Henry releases now. And finally, in the romance category, we have Sizzle Reel by Carolyn Greenwald. I really thought I read more sapphic romances this year than this, but apparently I was looking at my list, this is the only one that I read, which is so weird to me and I don't know why. So yeah, looking for way more sapphic romance recommendations in 2024, please send them my way if you have any favorites. The plot of this one is Luna is a 24-year-old aspiring cinematographer who's basically being ground to dust by the Hollywood machine when she meets rising superstar Valeria. The thing about this book is that I am 100% the target audience. It's gay, it's about the movie industry. This book was designed for me. So I really enjoyed it. The book kind of is a coming out story, and while I think it's kind of an overdone trope, I like how this book focused more on kind of coming into an identity rather than having to hide it, so I thought it navigated that pretty well. I highly recommend this book if you're looking for just like a fun, soapy, sapphic romance. Next up in the categories, we have sci-fi and fantasy. I have never been a huge sci-fi reader. I love The Martian, it's one of my favorite books, but that's about as far as I've gotten into the sci-fi realm. But I really expanded my horizons this year because I got a book of the month subscription, which I ended up canceling because I just found I wasn't reading the books in enough time. But that helped me find some new books, and some of them I liked, so I think that was successful for the most part. I also was a big fantasy reader growing up, and I've kind of fallen out of that, so I would like to dip my toe into that a little more as I go into the new year. First up is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I'll be honest, this book confused the hell out of me. I am not smart enough for all the physics that was in this book. Jason, a former physicist and current college professor turned family man, is kidnapped by an alternate universe version of himself who replaces him and traps him in a universe where he chose his career over his wife. This book is a really interesting look at the butterfly effect and also kind of the choices that we weigh between career and family, but it didn't really let the narrator sit in those choices all that much, which I think was really a disservice. I've learned that I really enjoy science fiction when it's used as a conduit to explore really human experiences, and this kind of just felt like sci-fi to be sci-fi, even though it was set up as exploring the human experience. The narrator spent more time trying to work his way back to his old life than reflecting on the choices that he made, so I don't know, that's just my opinion. Next up is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Six of Crows, which is excellent and I read last year. A team of young criminals called the Crows face consequences of pulling off the huge heist that they did in the last book and fight for their lives in the city of Ketterdam. I love how many twists these books have. They're usually executed really well, and I was pretty impressed by how well they held up in the sequel. I don't know if it was quite as strong as the first book, but it was really great to return to these characters. Next is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a murder mystery meets Groundhog Day book. Again, so many time loops this year. A man named Aiden wakes up in a different body every day for 8 days in order to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, but he's not the only one. If you like thrillers, this is probably a really good option. It has a really compelling mystery and the premise is really strong. However, the ending to me was just so confusing. The way that the mystery itself wrapped up, I found it really difficult to piece together what happened. However, I did like the meta twist that came in at the end, so I don't know, it might be for you. And finally, we have The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. June, a 30-something flower farmer in western North Carolina, is cursed, like all the women in her family are, to hear and see things that aren't really there and eventually to succumb to madness. But one day, when she sees a mysterious door in the middle of nowhere, she goes through it, travels back in time, and rediscovers a long-lost love and a murderous mystery. This is a really good example of complicated time travel dynamics that are executed really well and explained really well, so I really enjoyed that about the book. Like, there's probably some plot holes here and there if you look too closely, but for the most part, I thought it was good. I thought this book was going to be a case of setting up these complicated dynamics just to justify making a love triangle, and so I was really glad when that didn't happen, luckily. I loved the interpersonal dynamics and the setting. My one big critique is that the beginning was really slow, and I get that the narrator wanted to show her in present day for a good amount, but it was like a third of the way through the book, and we still hadn't gotten to the past, and I felt like that kind of did a disservice to the second half of the book. Alright, the next category is nonfiction. Ironically, I'm not a big nonfiction book person, despite being a big documentary person. Like I said, I'm mostly just here for the escapism, but I did try and broaden my horizons and read some nonfiction this year. First up is We're Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby. This is a collection of nonfiction essays, and it kind of acts as a memoir. This was the first time I had ever read anything by Samantha Irby, but I know she has a bunch of essay collections, and honestly, I might pick some of those up next year because I really enjoyed this. She strikes in a really impressive balance of being absolutely hilarious and also just absolutely devastating. I really love how she wrote about queer love and also didn't shy away from exposing her flaws. And I also like how the essays kind of flowed into one another or would call back to one another. I just love when authors do that. Next up is Sleeper Agent by Anne Hagedorn. This tells the story of an American-born Soviet spy who exposes nuclear secrets and gets away with it. I wanted to like this book so much, and I just didn't. I was so bored. Which I think is my fault. I think I'm just not good at reading nonfiction. Like, memoirs I'll do, but anything historical, it just bores me to tears. Some parts of it were written really compellingly, and then other parts I just felt like got lost in the weeds. So anyway, if you're interested in like nuclear era stuff, this is probably for you. Just wasn't for me, unfortunately. And finally, we have Bluettes by Maggie Nelson. This is a prose poetry memoir about the author's lifelong obsession with the color blue. I picked this up kind of on a whim at a coffee shop, and I ended up really enjoying it. I love the premise. I love talking about love through the lens of obsession, which this book does really well. And also, it's just so fascinating to learn all about the color blue and the different ways that the author looks at it. I also love a high concept book. This was maybe a little too high concept for me, but I thought it was executed really well. So, good work. And the final and largest category is novels and realistic fiction. I just love me a novel. I can't get enough of it, so that's why there's so many this year. First up is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is basically a retelling of Shakespeare's life, partially through his eyes and partially through the eyes of his wife Agnes, especially in relationship to their son Hamnet, who eventually dies and inspires Shakespeare's play Hamlet. I probably would have loved this book if I was an English major, however, I was not, so I just thought it was good. I really liked Agnes's point of view in this the best, I think. It was so strong, and I love how the author portrayed grief in this. It was good, unfortunately didn't crack my top 5. Next up is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This chronicles the story of a 1970s mega band through their eyes as they rise and eventually fall. I actually watched the television show of this before I read the book, which honestly I think was a mistake. I think I would have liked it a lot more if I had just read the book first. It did kind of temper my enjoyment of it because I knew it was coming, but it also helped me kind of get into it because it's written very uniquely. But I did love all the characters. I knew I would because I liked the TV show. I thought their interpersonal relationships were really well developed, and it was a really cool look at what the music industry was like at that time. The story really sucked me in, but I didn't love it as much as The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I did reread this year. This was my one reread. I love this book so much. I literally read it in 2 days when I was at the beach. It's amazing. Honestly, probably would have cracked my top 5 if it wasn't a reread. Next up is The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley. This book spans decades and follows 5 friends as they return to Big Sur to hold living funerals for one another whenever they most need it. I wanted to like this book so much, and I thought I was going to because I heard it was found family. But then you actually read it, and it's found family, but everyone hates each other. Like, I don't understand why any of these people are friends. They actively get on each other's nerves and like dislike each other and say horrible things to one another. And I just don't get I just don't get it. So yeah, that was really hard to get through. I think the concept was strong. Honestly, Happy Place did it better. So in my opinion, this is not worth the read. Next up is Mosquitoland by David Arnold. This book follows Mim, who is a young girl who treks from Mississippi back up to Ohio to visit her ailing mother after confronting her dad and new stepmom. I just loved the voice in this. I think it was really unique, and it's really cool because you're not sure how much of it is really happening and how much of it is because the narrator is off of her medication. I think the characters she meets are really compelling. I love a road trip, and I really like the character arc, and I think the ending was also really, really strong here. This is a coming of age, and it's really actually strongly written by someone who is not like a 13-year-old girl. Next up is Long Division by Kia Sid Lehman. This is a meta book inside the book story following 14-year-old Satoyan, who, after going viral for calling out racism on a nationally televised quiz show, finds a mysterious book called Long Division with the main character also named Satoyan, but is set in 1985. This book is such a cool concept. Like I said, I love a high concept book. I love a little meta action. I really like how it showed how racism reverberates throughout time and how it's changed and shifted into different forms throughout the years. I think the book inside of a book concept was really cool. However, I think it could have been executed a little better. Basically how it worked is that one side had one book and then the other side had the other book, so you just turn around and read. But I wasn't exactly sure how to read it, if I should be reading the two at the same time. So I think that maybe took away from it a little bit, but I thought it was very cool. Story was super compelling, super funny, definitely worth a read. And finally, we've arrived at my top 5 books of the year. And I will note these are not in any particular order. I really couldn't find it in my heart to rank these because they're all so different and they're all so special to me. So we're just gonna go through them. And first up is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. After writer Arthur Less receives a wedding invitation for his ex-boyfriend of 9 years, he embarks on a literary tour around the world in order to numb the pain. This book has such such an insane writing style, and I honestly loved it. It jumps around through time, like, in the same paragraph, and it does so in such a smart way, and it also has a really, really unique point of view that you don't really understand until the end. I know it's controversial. I personally really enjoyed it and thought it was really, really well written. The characters are super over the top and campy, but really earnest in a way that really grounds the story. And I also just love the travel stories, and I love how it doesn't shy away from the messier parts of love and life. Just really, really good if you're into uniquely written prose and also just a man who's just going through it. This is the book for you. Next up is romantic comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. Sally, who is a writer on an alternate universe Saturday Night Live style show, meets pop icon Noah when he guests on the show. This book was just so fun, and also I am 100% the target audience for it. I love sketch comedy. I read a sketch comedy show in college. I am a fan of SNL and stuff like that, so it's really cool to kind of get a peek behind the curtain of that. This book is also kind of in 3 sections, and I really love the pacing of each of them. I also really like how it used COVID. It had COVID happen in the universe of the book, but it did it in a way that served the story, which I thought was really unique. Also, we love a male love interest who goes to therapy. It's so good. It was just super charming and a really fun read. If you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted, this is the book for you. Next up is All My Mother's Lovers by Ilana Masad. Oh my god, this book. I got this in a blind date with a book at a bookstore, and it was advertised to me as a queer coming-of-age road trip, and so I was immediately sold. But it's also just so much more than that. Maggie's life is turned upside down when her estranged mother is killed in a car accident, leaving behind 5 envelopes addressed to 5 men who are not her husband. Desperate to escape her grief and to find answers about her parents' seemingly perfect marriage, Maggie sets out on a road trip to deliver the 5 envelopes. This book is just such a good depiction of grief and love and loss and queer identity. It has so many of my favorite things. It also managed to keep its momentum going throughout the whole book, which I thought was really cool. I read this in probably like 2 weeks, which is pretty fast for me. The main character is both deeply flawed, but also deeply sympathetic, and I just really like how she's written. Anyway, if there's any book on this list that interests you, read this one. It's so good, and I don't think enough people have read about it. I got so excited about these last 2 books, I fully kicked over my tripod, so hopefully we are still in focus and in frame. And my final 2 books on my top 5 this year are Memorial and Family Meal by Brian Washington. Here's the thing. If there are 0 Brian Washington fans, I am dead. I love Brian Washington. I have since last year when I was introduced to his short stories in a creative writing class. So I knew that I wanted to pick up and read both of his novels this year, and I got this one signed. The thing about Brian Washington characters is that they're all kind of the same in a different font. And I'll be honest, I eat it up every time. There are big themes of food, sex, love, Japanese culture, Black and queer identity, and Brian Washington also doesn't use quotation marks, which can sometimes feel gimmicky, but I think it makes his prose flow so smoothly, and I think it's really cool. Memorial follows the relationship of Benson and Mike, who have been together for years until Mike gets a call that his estranged father is dying in Osaka, just as his mother is visiting from Texas. So he leaves his mother Mitsuko and Benson behind in their apartment as he goes to Osaka to say his goodbyes. Both halves of the story are so compelling, and they play off of each other really interestingly. Also, the plot is just insane, and it really dives deep into these characters, which I really loved. Brian Washington is also just really, really good at showing the assumptions that we make about other people and kind of playing off of those as he explores different points of view. It's just so good. And Family Meal, which I am only halfway through, but is still making my top 5 this year because I'm a Brian Washington stan, and this one is already so good. After Cam returns to his hometown of Houston, haunted by the ghost of his dead boyfriend, he runs into his childhood friend, TJ. I love the different points of views here. I've only hit 3 so far. I don't know if there are more, but they're all so compelling, and they explore how different characters see each other in a really, really interesting way. I also love the way he depicts grief in this, and also love both romantic and familial. It's just so strong. So yeah, I can't comment at all about the ending, but so far this is also so good and would definitely recommend. I will say this one's a little bit less abstract than Memorial is, so if you're looking for kind of more of a traditional plot, I would go with Family Meal. Alright, and those are all the books that I read in 2023. I think I had a pretty good list going, and my goal for next year is to read 25 books, so crossing my fingers that works. If anyone has any suggestions, would love to hear them, especially anything sapphic, would love that. So anyway, Olivia, I'll see you on Wednesday.